Greetings, do-it-yourselfers. So we're gonna break away from the norm a little bit and insert a non-typical R&R video for the channel. I know it doesn't normally fit with the motif, but making a special exception here because once again, YouTube seems to be failing miserably at providing accurate information on how to do a typical job that you would think would have plenty of information available. This is a 2-liter Volkswagen that I'm doing a timing belt on. And I did a little research on YouTube and come to find out that I can't find a single video that shows how to correctly do this. And as a matter of fact, even worse, the most popular video by far on doing this job doesn't even mention about setting the tension on the new timing belt. And I've got to think with almost 300,000 views on that video, I would be better off doing an engine rebuilding video on this engine, since I'm pretty sure at least 300,000 people will need an engine rebuild if they don't tension their timing belt right. So we're going to kind of quickly go through that part of the procedure. We won't do a bolt by bolt. I don't think it's necessary. If you have the aptitude to do your timing belt, you should have the aptitude that all you really need is the timing component set marks and of course the proper tension settings. So let's get to it. So for those of you guys that know exactly what you're doing and all you need to know is how to set the timing tension, I'll just show that real quick. We will of course review it in the actual application, but many of you, that's the part that's missing from pretty much every other YouTube video I've seen on these like 98 through 05 Jettas and Beetles and all the ones with the 2.0 liter engine. I think the engine code is AEG or maybe also AVG. It would be the same kit either way. And this is the new timing component for the tensioner. You will see that there is a little marker here and a little notch here. And what we're going to do is you'll need some kind of special tool to fit in here. And I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do for that yet, but I'm sure I will. And we would line up with like this so that this little notch here, the lever lines up inside that notch. When the timing belt is installed and that lines up there, you know that the tension is correct. So that's what we're aiming for. Let's go ahead and get started. So before we begin, quick disclaimer, these are interference engines. If you do not do this job right, there is a very good chance you will destroy your engine. I will leave it up to you if you have the aptitude to do this type of job. Also be advised, I am not a professional mechanic. I am a do-it-yourselfer. I have never done one of these in my life. I am certainly not about to rely on the hacks that I was watching on YouTube for information. So I am going to go exclusively off the instruction sheet that came with my timing belt component kit. That will be the source for the information that I use in this video. All right, we will start this job with the timing cover removed. I will assume that since this is an advanced do-it-yourselfer channel, you would not need help on how to remove a timing cover with an engine. If you do, there are tons of videos that will show you how to do that. But honestly, if you cannot figure out how you would remove the timing belt because the engine mount goes through it, this probably is not the job for you until you get a little more aptitude. But you should know that the first step that you're going to have to do is put this engine to top dead center cylinder number 1. As you can see, the belt is removed on this engine because this engine was out of time. You also may have the situation where the belt has broken. So I'm going to show you how to kind of set it to cylinder number 1 from scratch by setting the camshaft and the crankshaft to their respective positions. On the camshaft sprocket, you can see that there is a notch in one of the teeth that will line up with the arrow on the back cover. And when those are lined up, your cam at least is at top dead center number 1 for compression stroke. If your car had the timing belt installed and it was already in time, this of course would necessitate that your crank is also in time. I personally never rely on that. You never know if it might have jumped the tooth or whatever. So we will still check that position accordingly. Now I know for a fact that this engine has never had a timing service done on it, so the paint mark is clearly factory on that cam sprocket. But what I'm going to do just to help for myself and also to make this stand out on camera is make some paint marks. Just so it's easier to see the alignment. It should be obvious to you guys how to bring cylinder number 1 up to top dead center. You would of course need to know where cylinder number 1 is though. On these engine, it is going to be on the rightmost side of the engine. That would be the passenger-most side of the engine. That is your cylinder number 1 location, so you can bring it to top dead center. Luckily, the German engineering has been brilliant enough that even though the spark plugs are underneath the intake manifold, they curve away so that you do have access to that number 1 cylinder, which is very nice. Now, also, there is, according to the instruction sheet that I read, another way to do this. The instruction sheet states that there is a window available on the transmission on the manual transmission models. This is a manual transmission model. And we'll see if I can see it here. I'm going to pause the camera. All right, admittedly, the instructions were maybe not the clearest on this, but I'm pretty sure that this cover on the transmission next to the clutch cable is going to be this access panel to look at the flywheel. And there's going to have to be some kind of mark on the flywheel, I imagine. Let me see if I can get this on camera. This is not an easy shot. All right, I am not sure exactly what we're supposed to be looking at here, but you can see the flywheel teeth there. One of the teeth, I am trying to catch it on camera, has a little bit of a white mark over it right there, kind of the leftmost tooth. And there is what appears to be kind of an alignment lip or mark that I'm just a hair off of on the housing for the transmission. As part of, because I had a timing belt failure with this engine, I wanted to make sure that there wasn't valve damage. Like I said, it is an interference design. So I did a leak down test on this engine. As part of that, I did set cylinder number 1 to top dead center, and I know that it is set in that position. So whatever you want to make of these marks, that is indicating top dead center pretty much, but I would rely far more on setting the piston to the highest level of travel from cylinder number 1. Even from my perspective, I really can't use this as an option, to be honest with you. It's just not easy to see. Okay, actually I did end up getting a good shot from the right parallax, and you can see that on the flywheel there is indeed a white mark, and it lines up with that little droop, that little arrow kind of droop on the casing for the transmission. So we can see now that clearly our crankshaft is definitely at top dead center now by other means, but I'm going to show you a better way to do this. And that is on the crankshaft sprocket. I have made a white paint mark myself for the alignment to top dead center on cylinder number 1, and this makes more sense to me since that's where I'll be working with the belt anyway. Notice on this model there does not appear to be any type of indication for top dead center with the crankshaft sprocket against the oil pump cover. That's a little bit unusual. First I've ever seen that on a vehicle, but this is what I'm going with for my top dead center mark. All right, I've got the new water pump in. If you do not install a new water pump and tensioner with this new belt install, you are doing it wrong. This car did not have a timing belt failure. It had a component failure for the timing belt. So it is critical that you change the water pump and the tensioner to do this right. The instructions, by the way, did not include a torque setting for this water pump, surprisingly, since the pump came with the component kit. So I had to look it up. It is 15 Newton meters. Luckily, this is where being a scientist comes in handy. A Newton meter is approximately 9 inch-pounds. So we're looking at about 130 inch-pounds for the torque setting on this. And now for one of the things that was neglected in pretty much every YouTube video I saw, the installation of the tensioner, much less the setting of it. You have to set this in properly. You don't just bolt it in. But one of the things before I install it, I'm going to make a paint setting on the indicator arrow here. And I guess I can also make one on the notch here so that it's easier for both myself and for the camera to see when we've got this set. Again, these will line up when the belt is installed, and after the belt has rotated a couple turns, if those settings are still lined up, that's how you know that your tension is correct and you're not going to have a massive failure destroying your engine. Wouldn't it be nice if some of those other YouTube videos pointed that out? Gosh, thanks YouTube. As I install this, I should point out this is a good time to replace your cam seal. If you feel up to it, it's not a bad idea to do that, whether it's leaking or not. Also, maybe a good time if you've got leaking oil pump, crank seal. That would be a good time for all this. I am kind of doing this job for charity, so I will not be doing that, mostly because I actually have a plane to catch, so I'm in a little bit of a hurry. And hopefully that plane is not maintained by the people who I were watching the YouTube videos from earlier. But the trick with this, don't just put it on and set the nut on here. Most of the time on a tensioner pulley for a engine, you're going to have some type of peg on the back that's going to sit into a recession or a hole on the block. That is not the case with this engine. However, there is a catch on the edge here. So what you'll want to do is when you install this, kind of set it so that your indicator lever is pointing at about 9 o'clock and fit it over, and we're going to rotate the back part, this part, not the pulley part, until it catches in position. So you'll know it when you got it right there. It's caught in position. This is the correct position that we want this tensioner on. If you do not do that, then the tensioner is going to be able to free rotate. So we want to set it right there. You'll feel it when you got it. And then I'm going to put the nut on, and I'm only going to tighten it hand tight. All right, now for the installation of the belt. One of the things I've noticed that I do actually like about this engine is the camshaft will not move easily from that position. It locks in that position, so the cam is clearly in a relaxed state at that particular top dead center position, which means I don't have to worry about the camshaft moving on me. I cannot say the same for the crank. The crank is the one that's going to go out of time when I put this belt and tension it. So given that, I think the best way I'm going to do this, I'm not much for reading directions, I admit. I'm going to use clamps to secure this belt so it won't slip off the camshaft, and I'm going to then use the crankshaft as the last point for installing the belt, because that way I can make sure my timing marks on the crankshaft remain still. All right, that went exactly according to plan. Got the belt on. You can see my timing marks that I've made are still lined up, so I know that my crankshaft position is good. And I'm quite positive that just the tension on the belt isn't going to turn the cam, but let's check that real quick. And we can clearly see our camshaft remained in time. So I actually did look at the directions, and it actually stated that you should go install the belt in the exact opposite procedure of what I did. I'm going to adamantly disagree with those instructions. I think the way that I did it is far easier. But however you do it, as long as you end up in time with your crank and cam, you would be good to go. Obviously now the second thing that was ignored in pretty much all the YouTube videos, and the most important thing to complete this job, we have to set the tension on that timing belt. All right, the directions state to turn the eccentric, that would be the adjuster here, 5 times all the way in each direction. I am not quite sure the purpose of that. Maybe there's some lubricant already in there, or maybe it's to just settle it in or test if there's a problem with the spring or whatever. But whatever it says, I'm gonna just go ahead and do that. I'm not quite sure what the point is. My special tool that I found will probably work for this application is this 90-degree bend in these pliers here. But any device or whatever you come up with that you can put into these holes here to turn this thing, the direction of tension is going to be counterclockwise. There is actually an arrow that you can see right there pointing in the direction of tension. My special tool seems to work pretty good, so I'm going to turn it 5 times in each direction. I don't know what the point is of this, but whatever. We can see, maybe you can see the white pulley. My hand's probably in the way, but when I tense it, all right, I'm not sure if you can see this, but as I tense this, you can see that little tab with my white paint indicator moving up towards that notched section so that I can set it to the right tension when I get to that point. But I'm going to continue going all the way both directions 5 times like the instructions said. All right, you can see the indicator moving. I'm going to go ahead now and turn this all the way over and set the tension on this thing. As you can see, even from my angle, you actually cannot see where that tensioner indicator is supposed to end up at. So what I've opted to do is this. I've opted to place a mirror in a position where I can see where the tensioner should end up at. And that is actually going to be blocked from your view when I go ahead and set this. Actually, my hand will be in the way. But you can see the final set point for the tensioner indicator at the very top 12 o'clock position from the pulley in the mirror. All right, I'm going to go ahead and tense this, and I'm going to be ready to tighten the bolt as soon as I get the tensioning set to the right point so that it will hold its position. And the nice thing about a camera, you can stick it into these tighter places, but you can see that my tensioning marks are perfectly lined up right now. So the next step I want to do is I want to double check that my timing marks didn't move. My crankshaft mark is still there. We can see the camshaft mark is still there. And I'm going to want to turn the camshaft 360 degrees. I want to go 360 on the cam. That would of course be 720 on the crank. And the critical thing here is to keep rolling to the point of top dead center like that. Don't stop, because when you stop, it affects the tension reading. So you want to keep rolling smoothly to your stop point back to top dead center so that we can ensure that the tension is accurately set. Let's go ahead and take a look at that now. And hopefully that's showing up, but that tensioner is dead centered in the notch. So we know that the tension is set right. Let's double check our timing marks. We can see the crankshaft is perfectly lined up, and we can see the cam is lined up as well. So the timing is set correctly and the belt tension is set correctly on this engine. And for whatever it's worth, that stupid mark on the flywheel is also perfectly lined up. And one final thing I like to do, just because I'm thorough, I like to actually crank the engine over a few times rather than put everything together and run the engine. And this way I can just make sure that the timing and the tension and everything is in the proper positions after cranking the engine at least. It just lets me see if there's any rattles or noises or any shifts in timing or anything that would better occur at only 200 RPM instead of 1800 RPM. So one thing to remember on this model, you're going to have the fuel system disconnected from the rail to access your belt. So don't forget that you're probably going to be squirting fuel out. So either reconnect that, or I just put a bypass on the hoses. And of course I don't want the engine to start, so I have gone ahead and unplugged the ignition coil to make sure that doesn't happen. Okay, and obviously that uneven compression sound and hiss was because I still have my leak down tester connected into the cylinder, so obviously a compression loss in that cylinder, but that's okay, that's intended. Check it out. I just about ended up at top dead center just by chance there. So let's go ahead and recheck our timing mark and tensions one final time, and then I'll put everything back together, of course, get that spark plug into that cylinder, and we will test to make sure that we have a complete fix. All right, final timing check before we put it all back together and run the engine. So I've got my crankshaft set to top dead center, which has set my camshaft to top dead center, cylinder number 1 compression stroke. And the tension mark, dead on the money. We have a properly timed, properly tensed engine. There is no question about it. I feel perfectly safe putting it together and running the engine. All right, I've got the engine put together enough that I can run it. I still probably don't have everything connected. I don't have the engine mount connected, so I just want to go ahead and run the engine, make sure that it sounds good. I've got the camera moved well out of the way in case I spew coolant or something everywhere. So let's go ahead and see how this works. And by the way, for those of you that have been following along on the series with this car from the original engine noise diagnosis that led to this timing belt change, I can guarantee you that that engine noise is going to be gone. Let's see. Oh, that sounds good. All right, let's make sure we're not in gear and give it a little gas. And of course, I can't give it too much gas because the engine mount isn't connected. But we can clearly see that sounds good. By the way, notice the check engine light is off. Earlier it was on because of a camshaft position sensor code. That is not the case. That would come up right away if we had a timing problem. This car is fixed. All right, how hard was that? So anyway, if this video helped you out because you are doing a Volkswagen timing belt and you were counting on YouTube getting you through the job, had you looked at any other video, you would have done it wrong. So the least you can do is click the little blue support button on the bottom of the video or on my homepage and give me $1. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this helpful.